In Jerusalem, Jewish exiles from Babylon rebuilt the temple, rebuilt the temple, rebuilt the temple.
Temple Mount came back into Jewish hands, opening the door to the building of the third Jewish temple.
The scriptures foretold long ago that the temple will be rebuilt before the Antichrist takes control of the holiest place in the temple. And though it hasn't been fully rebuilt since 70 AD, Bible prophecy is still unfolding today as the people prepare to restore the temple through a special ceremony.
The Temple Mount was back in Jewish hands. It rekindled hope for a long-awaited third temple.
With the Ark of the Covenant now rebuilt and the temple's gold prepared, the pieces are falling into place faster than ever. What else can we expect? And how do these signs point to Christ's return? Stay until the end as we unpack this exciting ceremony and what it means for the second coming of Christ.
It would be hard, I think, not to see what's happened in the past 50 years as a tremendous jumpstart, a tremendous fast forward.
The Sukkot ceremony. Seeing the scriptures come to life through recent events feels like a miracle. It reminds us that the sacred writings are true and can always be trusted. And last year was marked by countless events aligning with powerful prophecies. The most recent happened last October during the Jewish festival of Sukkot.
You may have noticed outdoor huts popping up all over the city this week. The temporary structures are called sukkahs and are part of the Jewish holiday of Sukkot.
What happened that day came as a shock to the global Christian community. To everybody's surprise, a full-sized replica of the Ark of the Covenant was put on display for everyone to see. It was designed according to the descriptions written in the scriptures, and the beautiful design was so accurate that many saw it as a sign that proved the third temple was just a few steps away from getting rebuilt. How can we be sure about that? Because the prophets wrote about these activities in the scriptures as future events almost 3,000 years ago, and so do current-day rabbis. Among these highly respected Jewish teachers is Rabbi Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. Rabbi Adam is a highly respected scholar in the Jewish community, and the reasons he gave for rebuilding this replica align perfectly with what the scriptures say about the future temple. So what did he say, and how does it prove that the rapture is closer than we think? As any Bible scholar would tell you, interpreting biblical prophecy can get tricky. So let's break it down one passage at a time. For one, in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 3, from verses 12 to 20, the weeping prophet shows that the people of Israel back then were stubbornly doing all the wrong things while believing God was still on their side just because the Ark of the Covenant was still in the temple. So in this passage written almost 3,000 years ago, the prophet promises that one day in the distant future, his people will respect his law through this event. Rabbi Simcha spoke about this through private interviews and also wrote about it in his blog on Israel 365. In both accounts, the rabbi made it clear that the reason behind this wasn't in the power of the ark they built, but in what it represented. And that was the connection between God and his people. They built it not because it was needed, but because they were ready to fully commit to his laws as a people and willing to draw closer to him. He called it a labor of faith and precision, and its display today isn't just symbolic, but is part of a much larger prophetic picture. But wait, several more clues in the scriptures point to this. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 tells us that sacrifices will be made as usual in the temple as it was in the days of Moses before the coming of the Antichrist, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. In both passages, the prophet and the apostle had a lot to say about the rebuilding of the temple. The prophet Daniel and the apostle Paul tell us that this mysterious person mentioned in the prophecy will sit and rule in the rebuilt temple. For this to happen, the temple in Jerusalem has to exist again as it did before its destruction, and for that to happen, the ark has to be there. What better item would fit the Holy of Holies today than the beautiful replica that shocked the Christian community? The prophet Moses gives us another clue in Exodus 25 about when the ark was built. The scriptures tell us that building the ark was the first step in setting up God's first place of worship, the tabernacle. This pattern is now repeated with the Jews setting up a perfect replica of the sacred chest for the world to see, with a better understanding of God's faithfulness to his people and imminent return. But of course, Christians interpret God's long-awaited return for the Jews as Christ's second coming. As for the sacred chest, no part of it was made in a rush. Trusted reports tell us that it took 17 skilled craftsmen to build the ark, and even with so many hands involved, it took over 3.5 years to finish. They used real Egyptian acacia wood coated with gold, as the scriptures instructed, working in faith that this would mark the first step in rebuilding the sacred temple. Not long after it was finished last year, the ark was taken to Jericho, just as it was several years ago through the army led by the brave judge and general Joshua in 1400 BC, not long after the death of Moses. It was also taken to Shiloh last year, just as it was in 1050 BC under the reign of King Saul and the prophet Samuel. Thousands from across the world came to see it. But here comes the exciting part. The crafting of this beautiful ark is just one out of the several things already prepared for the future temple. That's right, from the golden menorah to the expensive priestly garments described in the scriptures, most of the sacred tools found in the third temple that are mentioned in the Bible have been recreated today. We know this because each of them was crafted by workers within the Jewish Temple Institute, a real organization in Jerusalem that has recreated the menorah and all the priestly garments required for the temple to operate once it's finished. They too believe the time is near, and this was most obvious with the arrival of the perfect red heifers just 2 years ago. What made this so exciting? Stay with us as we delve deeper. The red heifers and Christ's coming. Let's start with the basics. Many times in the scriptures, red heifers are shown as very special cows that are mostly mentioned in the Old Testament. What made these cows so special was that they were completely red and had no spots or blemishes. For the sacrifice to work, these special cows were supposed to have never been used for farming. So in the end, what were these sacred animals used for? Numbers chapter 19 gives us the answer. You see, in Bible times, when someone became unclean by touching the infectious body of a dead animal, the cleansing process was done by using the ashes of a burned red heifer. This was done because the red heifer, by tradition, represented purity, and by ritual cleansing, with its ashes, the people are reminded to keep themselves clean at all times, especially before worship. Fast forward 3,000 years to September 2022, when 5 red heifers were flown in from a ranch in Texas to Israel.
Well, 3 years ago, the arrival of 5 red heifers in Israel attracted global attention.
This moment was very special because these heifers were required for the ancient ritual of purification, described in Numbers 19. Many Christian scholars were amazed by this, and over 300 Jewish people welcomed them. One of them welcomed the animals with a shofar, a special horn used in sacred Jewish ceremonies. The second thing that stood out was the person who found and collected the heifers for the Jews. This person was not a Jew, but a Christian who was eagerly waiting to see God's plan unfold. On top of that, the land for the sacrifice was purchased not long after the heifers arrived, and it was bought by Rabbi Yitzhak Mamo. He also believed that this was a bold step in the unfolding of God's plan for the Jewish people. Right now, the cows are kept under close watch by modern Levites to make sure they don't get injured and blemished until the day of the ceremony comes, and the rabbis believe it is fast approaching. But what do the scriptures say about this event? Was it also mentioned by the prophets of old? Now this is where it gets interesting. Multiple scriptures point to what happened with these sacred animals. The first is easily proven by simply going back to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. It tells us that sacrifices would start in the last days, and for these sacrifices to work according to the law, a ritual of purification must take place. This ritual needs the red heifers to be around, and after that, the sacrifices at the temple will begin according to the scriptures. The book of Hebrews, written just a few years before the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, tells us in the 9th chapter that the ashes of the heifer are to be seen as a shadow of Christ's return. Matthew chapter 23 verse 39 tells us that this won't happen until the Jews acknowledge him as their true Lord and King. And doing this would require looking at the sacred animals and objects like the Ark of the Covenant, not as God's presence, but as a constant reminder of his faithfulness. As far as we know, this step has already been accomplished, and all that remains is for the Jewish people to acknowledge Christ as King and herald his long-awaited return. There is a lot more to unpack, but let's examine a few more scriptures that point to this. Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 25, tells us that God will sprinkle the cleansing water on his people as a sign of the third temple's restoration in the future. Revelation chapter 1 calls all Christians priests, and by using a Christian to provide the sacred animals required for the cleansing ritual, many scholars believe that shows an important step in the prophecy's fulfillment. It gets even more exciting when we see that foreign leaders today are now talking about rebuilding the temple, just as the scriptures foretold long ago. You won't believe how accurate it was. The fulfilled prophecies. Isaiah chapter 60, verses 10 to 11, tells us that God would use foreign nations to rebuild their temple. But while foreign rulers today are careful not to even hint at rebuilding the temple for them, many well-known Israeli officials are still calling for its construction. Whether or not they would succeed with this anytime soon is completely up in the air, but if they do succeed, it would set the groundwork for the coming of the Antichrist, the one who hates God and everyone who submits to him. We know this because Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians warns us that it's going to happen, but for it to work, there has to be a standing temple with a Holy of Holies, sacred animals for cleansing, and at least a replica of the sacred chest. Even though some scholars believe this was fulfilled in 70 AD, when Titus and Vespasian destroyed the temple, the complete fulfillment hasn't happened yet. More details in the scriptures show that it was likely just a partial fulfillment that happened back then. This is because, as far as we know, Christ has not returned as he said he would after the famous 7 years of tribulation falls upon the Holy Land. This means that for the prophecy to work accurately, all this has to be done with a Jewish temple that is in operation, and the scriptures are littered with proof that aligns perfectly with recent events. Other New Testament passages, like Matthew 24, tell us that Israel's rebirth is like a budding fig tree. This means the movement today to rebuild the temple was known by God, and the fruits are almost ripe. Luke 21 tells us that the Jewish redemption arc will begin with these events taking place. And while some scholars try to brush off these events as random, the scriptures tell us that they are reminders. Romans 11 tells us that Israel's veil will be lifted once they start to realize that the old items like the Ark of the Covenant are just symbols and not God's presence, while Revelation 22 and Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians tell us that Christ's second coming isn't just a street slogan, but a divine countdown. They are not just moments in history, but divine reminders for Christians to always preach the gospel, watch and pray, just as Christ instructed. With recent events going on in the Middle East, would the Jewish Temple Institute be able to rebuild its sacred place anytime soon? How would all of this end? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.